Can you all see that? We good? Okay. So as Jan said, what I want to talk about tonight is patterns of strategy, which is an approach I developed with a colleague of mine, Lucy, who's not here tonight, that Jan also knows. So we're going to run through how the approach is built up and take you through a couple of examples, really, and then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for discussion afterwards. I haven't actually planned to do anything about the war room, Jan, but we can come back to that if you like. That's kind of fine. So this is us. We do company's fractal. We do strategy, obviously, organization, so diagnosis and design and change, and we do that for a wide range of organizations. So all of this is kind of non-sector specific. So there's private sector, public sector, third sector, and for us, you know, putting together that strategy, organization, and change, those elements, there's a natural kind of flow through. We don't sell at all. So all our work comes from referrals, which means it actually has to work. Because if it doesn't work, if we do a project for someone and it fails, then we don't get asked back, so we don't get any more work. So actually having approaches that work, that do the job, is kind of important for us in a way that it's not for a lot of consultancies, if I may say that. So I just want to do a sort of quick look at the field of strategy, if you like, and there was a famous article by Henry Mintzberg which kind of looked at this in two ways. So one was what he called deliberate strategy, which is, I think, what most people think about when they think of strategy. So this is strategy as the intention of the organization. So having a plan and following that plan. And the other side that Henry talked about was emergent strategy. So what actually happens? So irrespective of what it was that we wanted to happen, what actually did happen? You know, what was the strategic direction that the organization took? And if you look in the deliberate strategy side, there's kind of two ways that gets done. One is you start from the outside, so it tends to be kind of market led, and you do an analysis of what the external environment looks like, and then you fit the organization to the external environment. And the other way around is you look inside the organization, you say, what is it we're good at? And then you say, where out in the environment could we usefully play and get some advantage? I mean, either way, this is kind of looking at one side, looking at a relationship from one side, and a lot of the tooling around this is like this. It's like 2x2 matrices, and for some reason the right answer is always in the top right box, which makes it incredibly easy to do the strategy, because all you got to do is go, yeah, we want to be there, and that's kind of the thing done, you know. But there is a lot of tooling on the deliberate strategy side. There are lots and lots of tools. They're all, a lot of them are pretty similar, but there's a lot of stuff out there. On the emergent strategy side, there's actually, well, up till this and up until we did patterns of strategy, there was basically no tooling. And one of the things we find is that occasionally you get strategists who kind of look at the emergent strategy and stuff and that Mintzberg talked about and go, oh yeah, well, obviously Henry knows what he's talking about, but we haven't got a way of dealing with that. So they tend to fall back onto the deliberate strategy and just plan with what they can. The difficulty, I think, is the statistics that the vast majority of strategic plans, the vast majority of deliberate strategy fails. The most optimistic statistics I've seen on this are a 70% failure rate for deliberate strategy. And the most pessimistic from Russ Ackoff was 98% failure rate. So something is seriously wrong, if it goes wrong that often. What happens when it does go wrong, of course, is something that emerges. So the vast majority of strategic outcomes are on the right-hand side, not the left-hand side. And yet there's there seems to be a massive mismatch in where the attention is in this. Whether you start from the outside in or the inside out on a conventional strategy approach, there's a kind of dominant narrative, and it's this kind of journey metaphor that strategy is about where we are, where we want to get to, and drawing a straight line from where we are to where we want to get to, and that's the plan. And the assumption is that if we follow that, we'll get to where we want to get to, and everything will be fine. And that's great if you're planning a trip to the seaside. The problem is that strategy is really not like that for several reasons. One is that the seaside actually exists as a place, whereas our strategic future does not actually exist. It's something that has to be created. So, thinking about it as if it's a journey makes a fundamental error, that it's actually strategic futures are an act of creation. They're not just driving down a road. The other is that it ignores what everybody else is doing. So virtually every strategic situation that you're likely to find yourself in is populated by other actors. It's not just us. And under the impact of those, our target position tends to change. We tend to run into situations where we're having to dodge around what other people are doing, and we end up doing something completely different. We end up aiming for somewhere different, getting somewhere different, and on a completely different plan to the plan we started with. And this is kind of normal. So if the vast majority of strategic plans don't actually happen, they're not implemented, and this 90% figure is from Kaplan and Norton, the guys who invented balanced scorecard. And they're about as conventional pair of people as you could hope for. This is not anybody sort of, with weird hair and starey eyes. These are absolutely rock solid, middle of the road people, who are sort of commonly used in business. So if around 90% of traditional strategic plans are never implemented, and yet organizations and business are still changing, they're changing all the time, and we know that's the case. The question it asked for us is what's driving the changes? So, beyond just going, oh, it's a shame that most strategy doesn't happen, it fails. For us, there was a much, much more profound question, like, what is going on? Because if it isn't the strategic plans that are driving the change, and it can't be because they're not being implemented most of the time, what is driving the change? What is actually going on there? And that was a question that we picked up. Well, actually, it was interesting actually for me because in preparation for today, for this evening, earlier on today, I thought I'd better go and look for a suitable presentation. I've got several presentations on patterns and strategy, as you might imagine. And looking back through the file list, the first one we did on this was in 2012. So been working on this, I guess, for 9 years. Started it 9 years ago. So that was the question that we were trying to deal with then. And as so often in systems, what we did was go back to biological models. And the model we went to was Umberto Maturana's model of structural coupling. So Maturana's a biologist originally. And what he was interested in was how organisms evolve, how species evolve. So when Charles Darwin did The Origin of Species, he could observe that evolution happened, but he didn't know what the mechanism was. So he hypothesized that it was competition, but there was no evidence that it was competition. So Maturana came along and had a look at this. And his conclusion was that it was a thing that he called structural coupling, which is a really, really simple idea, which is that the organism is coupled to its environment in such a way that the organism changes the environment structurally and the environment changes the organism structurally. So the hummingbird's beak evolves to fit the flower, and the flower evolves to fit the hummingbird's beak. And they are structurally coupled to one another. And they co-evolve in partnership with one another, so that you've got the direction of change dictated by the relationships that you are in. And it's a really, really simple idea. So we looked at transposing that into the business domain, and it was scarily easy. I mean, it was a very, very easy to take that model and apply it to business and to organizations, to say, what does this tell us about the nature of how organizations change? So we could immediately see, and I'd kind of been aware of this for a long, long time, that organizations do get locked into relationships that basically drive the strategy and drive the thinking and drive everything in the business. So to a large extent, organizations are driven by their environments, at least as much as they drive the environment. Although in deliberate strategy, of course, we only look at half of that relationship. We assume that we're driving it as the organization, rather than we are being driven by it. And when we look at structural coupling and the fit, the strategic fit between the organization and its environment, there are lots and lots of ways to make that work. So we've got a catalogue of around 100 now, different strategies that we see that are successful. And if you contrast that with Michael Porter, the author of Competitive Advantage, which was kind of one of the first books on strategy, he basically had two strategies that worked. One was, work at the top end of the market and charge a fortune, and the other one was work at the bottom end of the market and pile them high and sell them cheap. Actually, there are a lot more different ways to win strategically. And partly what I think this approach does is open up the range of possibilities for organizations to be successful in their environments. So if you've got a structural coupling, these have a natural trajectory. So you're in a relationship, and as you're in that relationship, there are particular opportunities and risks that it presents to you. So you tend to move forward in relation to those. You tend to move forward towards the opportunities and away from the risks. And you do that step by step by step. And it looks and feels like this is something that you are doing deliberately, but actually the trajectory is being driven by the dynamics of the relationship. So this is not necessarily conscious. We kind of look at it in retrospect and go, oh yes, of course, we meant to end up here at the gate, going into the field. But actually that's dictated by the path that we have set ourselves on. And we are not as conscious of having taken of the decision to actually take that path. Once we're on it, we follow it. If we look back, very often there were forks. There were places where we could have turned off. We could have turned off to the left, but we didn't, because we followed the natural trajectory. So very often those choices are ignored. And partly what this is about is being more aware of those choices, really. So some key questions about structural couplings are which structural couplings are we in? What are they like? Where does this relationship take us? If we just leave it alone, where's this going to take us? Is that where we want to go? And critically, in terms of identity, what will this make us into? If we stay in this relationship and we just let it go, run its course, what does that turn us into? Who do we become if we do that? And is that who we want to be? And those are kind of fundamental questions that are kind of pertinent here. And of course, you've got a number of structural couplings for an organization. So if we've got an organization, typically it will have a relationship with the market, with competitors, maybe with the regulator, always with partners. So there'll be multiple structural couplings, and the options we have are to add some, take some away, or change the nature of the coupling. And really the approach I want to talk about is about changing the nature of the coupling. All of them exert a tension or a pressure on us. So they're pulling and pushing us in particular directions. And that our overall strategic direction is a product of those. And of course, this is what Mintzberg calls emergent strategy. It is where we end up going as a result of the relationships that we're in. And it's about, for us, this is about understanding that and understanding what we can do about it. So we define strategy as changing our fit with the environment to our advantage by concentrating power in time. So there's three critical dimensions: fit, time, and power. And of course, conventional strategy really only has a language of power. So occasionally the people will talk about strategic fit, but it's never really defined in conventional strategy. Time, almost never talked about in strategy, except in execution. You know, it's sort of shuffled off into a timeline on a roadmap or something. But it's a critical dimension. And to work with those, we break those down into a number of elements, those three dimensions. So 2 of power, 3 of fit, and 1 of time. And I'll just go through how that's kind of built up. So the first one of fit is around differentiation. So quite simply, how similar or different to others we are. And in most situations, most strategic situations, there is a recognizable herd. So there are a bunch of organizations that are very, very similar to one another. And they self-reference, so they reference one another, they copy what one another do. And of course, where there is a herd, there is a boundary, and there will be some players who are at the leading edge, and you know who they are because everybody follows them. And there will be some players at the lagging edge, and you know who they are because nobody is following them. And there'll be some players at the sides who are the edge at the sides, who are somewhat different, but nobody's following them particularly. So if you take the car market, for example, you've got a bunch of organizations, you've got a bunch of car makers who basically copy what one another do. So if one brings out a Super Mini, they all bring out a Super Mini, or most of them do. So they follow one another, and it's a case of who happens to be going first at this time. They are the lead organization in the herd. And then you get some organizations at the side. So in the car market, for example, Subaru, who do several things to be different from everybody else. They've got, different types of engines. They do the engineering in a different way. Nobody copies Subaru. So they are near enough to be still part of the herd. They don't do something really wild and wacky, but nobody's copying them. And then the third place really between herd and edge is individuals. So you have players who are completely outside of the herd. So if you think about the IT market, for a long, long time, this was dominated by Microsoft. So you had an ecosystem really built around Microsoft. And before Microsoft, it was IBM. So you had IBM and the Seven Dwarfs. And outside of that ecosystem, outside of that herd rather, was Apple. And Apple did everything they could to be different, to differentiate themselves. So at the time when everybody did kind of beige colored boxes, Apple did see-through colored computers. They had a different business model. So they did their Apple software that ran on Apple hardware. Nobody else did that. And they appealed to a particular niche. And that was great. And they did everything to be different from everybody else. And that worked fantastically for them right up until they brought out the iPad. And as soon as they brought out the iPad, the entire herd stampeded over to where they are. And they are now subsumed within the herd. So Apple are really, really struggling now, and have been for quite some time, particularly without Steve Jobs, to differentiate themselves, because they are obscenely rich. And of course, when you are obscenely rich, it's extremely difficult to take risks because you've got a hell of a lot to lose if you get it wrong. So trying to differentiate again, really, really hard. But they don't really know how to play the strategies, the winning strategies for being in the herd. So they're not going to go out of business quickly because they've got a vast amount of money. But in terms of identity, they are kind of having a bit of an identity crisis. So that's the first element, differentiation. The next one is around drive. So if we've got a structural coupling, what's the nature of the relationship? So is this a relationship where one party shapes the relationship and the other one basically reacts to it? Or is it a relationship which is much more even, where actually the two parties are co-evolving? And there's no rights or wrongs about this. The relationships are the way the relationships are. So through time, is there a dominant pattern in who changes who's driving the change in this relationship? And what's the nature of the change that's being driven in this structurally coupled relationship? So on a risk-reward graph, is it incremental? Is it radical? Is it disruptive? Is it a paradigm shift? Or is it change that one party is doing deliberately to screw things up for the other, to confound them? And again, there are choices here. There's no right or wrong answer. Yeah, so most organizations really, I would say most organizations are good at one type of change, and that's all really. Most don't have a good change repertoire, and that's always something that it's kind of helpful to exchange your range on, if you can. In terms of time, we're interested in the relative speed of the actors in the coupling. So is this a relationship in which one actor's significantly faster and then by definition the other one's slower? Or is it a relationship where both are moving at roughly the same speed? And again, no rights or wrongs to it. It is what it is, but it's a really, really important dimension to the strategy. And if we want to change the time dimension, there are a number of things we can do. We can use foresight. So if we can see things coming far enough ahead, foresight is really a strategic foresight is really a way of stretching time. The further off you can see change coming, the more time you have to decide what to do and to put those decisions into effect. So foresight effectively slows time down for you. It's a massive advantage. Change rate, we can either increase the level of stretch, which increases change rate, or given a particular level of stretch, if we're just doing incremental, we can turn the handle on that faster. So can we increase the rate at which we change relative to the other party? And cycle time. So can we just turn the handle on our processes faster? If you think about whether that's operational processes or strategic processes, if you think about the revolution that was the Toyota production system, that was mostly based on a shift in the operational cycle time. So a shift from having factories that were set up to produce the same components for months or years at a time to single minute exchange of dies. So you could change product lines really, really fast. And that was the basis of the Toyota production system. And it totally revolutionized the economics and the strategic outcomes in the industry. Yeah, so that dimension of time is critically important in a lot of areas. In military strategy, this wouldn't be an issue. I mean, everybody gets that time is really, really important. In business strategy, it's almost totally ignored. It's fascinating, really. I was doing some work today for the UK government agency that's in charge of research and innovation, so UKRI. And of course, they fund research initiatives in the UK. They're acutely aware of how important speed of action is. So, if you spend $1 million in a month, it is not the same as spending $1 million in 6 months. In terms of its impact on the innovation, time is absolutely fundamentally critical for them. Unfortunately, the Treasury isn't geared up to do that. So some interesting debates to be had there. Strength. So in our relationship, have we got a relationship, a structurally coupled relation? Have we got a relationship where one side is significantly stronger and therefore by definition the other side is weaker? Or is it a relationship in which both parties are roughly balanced in power? And whatever the relationship of power, we have choices over how to concentrate it. So are we doing a single thing? Are we doing multiple things? Or are we doing lots and lots of things? So how concentrated is the power that we have? Do we spread it over lots of things so we're weak everywhere? Do we concentrate it into just one thing so we miss a lot of other things? And of course, there are choices there. And organizations take those strategic choices all the time. If we want to change the relationship of power in a coupling, then there's two enablers. In the same way as we had with time, there are two enablers to this. One is critical mass. So can you deploy enough resource to significantly shift the balance of power in the relationship? And the other one is agility. So lots of talk about agility now. We mean something really specific. So we're not talking about agile software. What we're talking about is the ability to redeploy resource, to pivot the resource from doing what it's doing now to doing something different. And that acts as if you like, a force multiplier. You can get more from your given resource if you can move it quickly. So both of those are ways in which you can shift that balance of power. When we're looking at relationships, I sail, so I tend to think of it like this, but if we're looking at relationships, what we're looking at is the differentials in the relationship. And the strength of the differential drives the dynamics of the relationship. So you can think about this in terms of a weather map, in terms of high and low pressure. Where there is a big differential between centers, if you like, that drives a huge amount of the energy. Where we've got very, very similar, very low differential between actors, it tends to be a really, really stable situation. So if you think about, for example, Procter & Gamble and Unilever, there's not a lot of differential between them, and they have fought, a battle of attrition for decades, and nobody has gained any advantage from that. And it's because there is no differential, so there are no dynamics in that relationship. It's static. So the static doesn't, or it's very stable. Doesn't mean it's nice. It just means it's not changing very much. If you get high differentials, the situation tends to change quite quickly. If you're in a competitive situation, any differential can be used. Yeah, whether you're stronger or you're weaker or you're faster or you're slower, all of them can be used to your advantage. If you're in a collaborative situation, then there's a kind of sweet spot that we collaborate with people who are different to us, but if they're too different, it's horrible. So there's a kind of a sweet spot of being different enough to make it worthwhile, and not so different that working together is impossible. We've had a few encounters with, I mean, we're a small consultancy. We've had a few encounters with much bigger consultancies who, you know, liked us for the innovative stuff, but we've mutually found it really, really difficult to work together because they want, you know, they tend to be much more bureaucratic, and we hate that, and they hate the fact that we don't do timesheets and all that sort of stuff. So that basic level of how do you fit together, it doesn't fit, you know, and that makes it really, really hard. I want to illustrate it with a historical case, so which I think picks up some of these themes. So the case I'm going to use is the Honda Yamaha motorbike war of 1981 to 1983. So at the time, both Honda and Yamaha are parts of big Japanese keiretsus, so big Japanese industrial groups. Now at the time, they were, Honda motorbikes and Yamaha motorbikes were balanced in terms of power. So they both had about the same level of resource. They were perfectly matched in terms of the concentration of that power. So each of them had about 60 bikes in the marketplace, and they were matched bike for bike, niche for niche, segment for segment. There was almost a perfect face-off there. They were co-evolving, so neither was particularly driving change asymmetrically in the other. So one would change something and the other one would respond. The second one would change something, the first one would respond. And it was very, very even in that sense. All the change was incremental. So the huge changes in the industry had taken place decades before, which is when the Japanese motorbike manufacturers basically wiped out most of the European motorbike manufacturers, including most of the ones in fact, all of the ones in the UK. So there'd been a big transformational shift some time before, and now they were just building on that incremental change, nothing dramatic. The industry was synchronized, so perfectly synchronized, once a year, regular as clockwork. Everybody with at the annual bike shows would bring out roughly 10 new models and retire roughly 10 old models rather. So everything happened on a clock, and everybody knew exactly where they stood with that. At the time, Yamaha was seen as being part of the motorbike herd along with Suzuki and Kawasaki, and Honda was seen as being at the leading edge. So you can see that there is virtually no differential keeping them at the leading edge. They were there for historical reasons. They have no advantage. They're not stronger. They're not more innovative. They're not faster. They're not either more concentrated or less concentrated. They have no real advantage, Honda. They're at the leading edge because they got there first, and nobody else has moved past them. Now, this is as you can see, this is a very, very, very evenly matched situation. It's an incredibly stable relationship. Nothing moved. And it hadn't moved for a long time. Now, at the time, 1981, Honda were investing massively, the Keiretsu were investing massively in the car industry. So all the Honda Keiretsu war chest was involved in building car factories internationally, including in the UK. And Yamaha saw this as an opportunity to take control of the bike market. So the Yamaha Keiretsu said to the Yamaha Motorbikes board, this is your opportunity to take control of the bike market. And the Yamaha plan looked like this. They went for critical mass. So build the world's biggest motorbike factory, which they calculated would give them economies of scale, move them from balance to stronger and push Honda back into being weaker. That they reckoned would allow them to shape and push Honda back into reacting. And that they calculated would move them to the leading edge and push Honda back into the herd. And that would be a win for Yamaha. So you can see how the elements string together to form a strategy. And you can also see how a really, really stable relationship that had been stable for a very long time, you move one piece in it and the whole thing starts to shift and suddenly becomes really, really, really dynamic. Yeah. So this idea of the stability or the dynamics of the relationship, I think is key and one to kind of bear in mind on this. So that was the Yamaha plan, which was lovely. It didn't quite work like that. So the Honda riposte kind of looked like this. The Honda Keiretsu board go along to the Honda motorbike board and say, you have to win this battle and you cannot have a war chest because we're spending it on cars to fight Yamaha. So you have to do it a different way. Think of a way to beat Yamaha that doesn't involve spending a load of money. So they had to be a lot smarter. And the Honda strategy looked like this. It starts with foresight. You can't build the world's biggest motorbike factory in Japan without somebody noticing. So the Honda team knew exactly what Yamaha were doing and why they were doing it and what it meant. And in true Japanese judo kind of style, they decided to use their enemy's strength against them. So built on that foresight, they waited until Yamaha were fully committed to building and bringing on stream this factory. And all their resources were taken up with that. All their management attention was taken up with the new factory. In the meantime, Honda massively reduced the cycle time to design, develop, and bring to market new bikes. And they restructured so that they could shift resources into many more product development teams that could design, develop, and bring to market new bikes. That meant that they were much faster. That increased their change rate, which made them faster and made Yamaha slower. And then they unleashed it. So they went from having multiple bikes in the market, so roughly 60, the same number as Yamaha. And they brought out 113 new models in an 18-month period. So if you think that they had gone from bringing out 10 bikes a year to 113 in 18 months, it's almost a kind of tenfold increase. The number was not an accident. Okay, so they didn't have time to do any clever engineering. So what they did was go for a paradigm shift. The bike market up to then had been built around different sizes of bikes. So if you wanted to buy a bike, you decide what size, what cc, what cubic capacity of bike you wanted, how big the engine was. So you'd kind of go, I want a 750cc 4-cylinder bike. What's on the market, and you buy on that basis. Honda went for a paradigm shift instead. So instead of doing a massive engineering job, what they did was take every segment of the market that Yamaha had a bike in and split that in half and built two bikes that were for particular tribes of biker who might want to buy a bike. So the 113 was no accident. It was, we are going to shatter the structure of the industry that or the market that your bikes are designed for. And we're going to do that by changing the style and the buying patterns of the market. So now if you were a biker, you go out to look for a new bike, and you would see that Honda had designed a bike specifically for someone like you, and Yamaha had not. And of course, they did that deliberately to confound Yamaha. That allowed them to shape, and it pushed Yamaha back into reacting. So at the same time as they're trying to bring on stream their huge new factory, which is designed to do huge volumes of a small set of models, they now have to start inventing new models. And in the 18-month period, they come out with 37. But of course, it doesn't stack up against the 113 that Honda have put out. And at the end of that 18-month period, Yamaha are left with 12 months worth of unsold and unsaleable stock, and formally surrendered to Honda and said, "I'm sorry, we won't do it again." And that was a win for Honda. So you can see, I think, both how the situation unfolds from very, very stable to very, very dynamic. You can see the speed at which that strategy sometimes has to happen. So conventionally, we think of doing strategy in 5-year plans or something. This was all over and done with in 2 years, from start to finished, and actually finished, closed down, was 2 years. And you can also see, I think, how this is emergent. So you can think of this as a deliberate plan. It was a deliberate plan by Yamaha, and the actual plan, Honda's riposte, was a deliberate plan. But the whole thing was something that nobody planned. So the story starts with Honda deciding to take away the war chest to do something else. And Yamaha fell into the vacuum. That effectively started the destabilization of the relationship. And Yamaha fell into that potentially weaker position that Honda had exposed themselves to. So Yamaha's strategy was a consequence of Honda's strategy about something completely different. And Honda's strategy was a consequence of Yamaha's strategy, which was a consequence of Honda's strategy, which was about something completely different. So the whole thing as a totality was a complete accident. Nobody planned for it to work like this. They planned the bits, but they didn't plan the overall outcome. This was nobody's real intention. Just do another one. So this is the authority strategy. So what we see, of course, is a series of patterns, hence the name patterns of strategy. And this is the strategy that Gartner used, the authority strategy. So, I mean, most of you, I think, will know of Gartner. They're the guys who basically tell you what IT you ought to buy and tell IT providers what they ought to be providing. So they really, really dominate a lot of the IT market. They are the authority on who should buy what and what you should make if you want people to buy you. And they started off as a fairly simple, a fairly normal IT consultancy, but they quickly changed, and it started with really building up a critical mass of expertise and knowledge. Quite a lot of consultancies do that. The that made them stronger. The thing that really made a difference really was foresight. That rather than just using that stronger position to do projects in the marketplace and have an advantage there, they used it to forecast where the market was going to go, and their incremental to radical shift was to deploy that foresight as the thing, as the offer in a sense. And that created an even bigger shift in the market. So the effect on the market was either radical or disruptive. That allows them to shape, and the market starts to react. And the killer in this is maneuver 4. Because for the authority, the more they shape, the stronger they become. And the stronger they become, the more they're able to shape. So once you've got into a position of authority, it is really, really hard for anyone to displace you. So Forrester have been trying to displace Gartner for a decade and have got absolutely nowhere with it. And they are not the first to try it. So the longer it goes on, the stronger Gartner become. Yeah, and they are just the go-to guys. You know, we've got a client now going through a digital transformation, and their default for who should we ask about how to do this? Gartner. Yeah, you know, Gartner don't produce anything that's terribly exciting, but they are the authority, so they kind of win. As I say, when we started with this, what we wanted to understand is how emergent strategy emerges. So what is going on in the strategy space? Because if it's not conventional strategy, strategic plans that are driving the changes, what is? What we came out with purely accidentally is we kept seeing the same patterns repeated. So we saw the same strategies being repeated again and again and again. And we started to collect those. And then we sorted them into families. And we've got at the time we wrote the book, which was 3-4 years ago, we had a catalogue of about 80 that we'd seen for different situations. So for competition, for growth, for small organization, whatever. So there are different strategies for all sorts of situations that you might find yourself in. And there are a lot of them. We're finding it really hard to find any more now, but we're up to just over 100. But the rate of discoveries slowed down. When we started, we kind of assumed that because everybody in strategy talks about growth and competition, we assumed that that was going to be the biggest set of strategies, but it's not. The biggest set is actually defensive. So there are more defensive strategies that we see than any other type. And the second biggest are cunning plans. So the strategies of deception, particularly common in the financial sector, I'm afraid, but there you go. And each of those patterns, we define it in terms of what the impact is on the structural coupling, an overview of what that looks like, where it's used, so who uses it, when do they use it, what do they win by using it, what the recipe is, what the ingredients for the recipe are. So to do this strategy, what it is you need in terms of capabilities, and at what point should you reevaluate it and possibly throw it away and do another one, and an example. So in writing those up, that's kind of how we've written it up, really. So some advantages of it for us, it is massively faster than doing strategy in a conventional way. In our experience, we did an exercise for a financial organization. They've been working with one of the big 4 consultancies for 18 months on their strategy, and they reckon they got further and deeper in 3 hours with this than they had in the last 18 months. It is phenomenally quick. It is really, really precise, because if you go through it maneuver by maneuver, it makes it incredibly easy to say, for this maneuver, what do we need to change? And what would be the metrics of success? So it's really, really, it takes you into that change planning really, really easily. Works for competition and collaboration. So conventional strategy is kind of predicated on the idea of competition, and that's fine because some organizations do compete, but every organization collaborates. So if you've got an approach to strategy that only works on competition, you've missed half of the world at least. Scalable, so we've done it from multinationals down to teams. You can use it. We don't do so much of this, but it's really, really effective and really good for modeling entire business ecosystems. And it's not hard to do, and it is not a big job to take an ecosystem, work out who the players are. That's really usually relatively easy. And then just go through the patterns and say, who is using this strategy in this ecosystem, and build up a map of the whole ecosystem and the strategies that are being played out. And it's a phenomenally powerful exercise to do. We did one for a sector in the UK a couple of years ago, and the guy who sponsored us looked at the model and just left the organization. He was gone within a month and got a job in a different sector, because you looked at the ecosystem model and said, this bit of the ecosystem is doomed. So he walked, and for us as consultants, it's really important that it connects directly into organization design. So if we've got this strategy, what does the organization need to look like to execute that and to conceive it? Connects to strategic risk and directly into transformation planning. So just talking a little bit about that, if I take the Honda Yamaha one, if you look at this in terms of the metrics for this, it's really easy to go through it maneuver by maneuver and say, what are the metrics for it? So foresight, no surprises. Yeah, if we don't see anything that surprises us, we know our foresight is working. For them, for cycle time, they needed to get the time to design, develop, and launch a new model down to a third of what it had been. So you can be really precise for the strategy of what it is we actually need. The launch rate has to go up by a factor of 10, from 10 to 100 a year. Yeah, and for us to be faster and them slower, their launch rate has to be at least half of ours. Yeah. Number of development team projects up by a factor of 10 in order to get that increased number. Yeah. And again, you can be really, really precise about that. The number of market niches has to go up dramatically. And we know the paradigm shift has worked if the market accepts the new niches. So some of these are metrics of us, some of these are metrics of the external environment, some of these are metrics of the other actor. So we know we have confounded them when their response is incoherent. Yeah. And we know they're reacting when they start to copy our strategy. That otherwise none of this is real. And we know that we have won in the end when they formally surrender. So you can be really, really specific, both what needs to change and how we would know it was working. And that makes it all a hell of a lot easier, really. So that's kind of me done, really. I've got a little bit of a slideshow while we talk, if you like. Questions, thoughts? Jan, go. Got to be some questions, surely.
Hi, Patrick. That's fascinating. It's I'm joining from Australia, Sydney. It's almost 6:30 now, which is good. It might be a bit of a loaded question, but are you Wortley has published some climate patterns and strategic response and things like that. I see some similarities, some not a lot actually. But have you looked at Wortley's climate patterns and doctrines and things like that? And do you see any commonalities here, or because that has found a lot of common dominant in the market now? A lot of people in the strategy field are moving into that direction. I find this particularly with the landscape fit to begin with. Look, I'm speechless, after your session. So it's just keen to hear your thoughts on that.
The stuff I know from Simon Wardley is Wardley maps. So is that what we're talking about?
No. Wardley have actually published also strategies. Unfortunately, that's the piece of his work that is seen by most. But he's also published some climate patterns and doctrines to respond to that,
right.
which
No,
I kind of find it a bit
that.
similar. Yeah, okay.
I haven't seen that. I mean, I do quite like his other stuff. I mean, it's the same guy, isn't it? Simon Wardley, yeah.
Yes, Simon Wardley. Yeah.
I do quite like his maps. I mean, in a way, it's the Wardley mapping stuff. That's, I mean, you can look at it and go, well, that's just Moore's chasm with some clever graphics, but I think it brings a dimension to it. And the thing I like about that aspect, I mean, I can't talk about the other stuff because I haven't seen it, but I mean, I will go and have a look at it, but so if you can point me to it, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
The thing I like about the Wardley maps is his thinking about the dynamics of it. Yeah. And I think that's kind of where there's a similarity. I mean, I think it's certainly the Wardley maps are much narrower, but they're great for what they're designed for. So, and I think, I'm a big fan of Jeff Moore's work on the chasm, and you can see Simon Wardley's stuff as just that, but I think it's there is a huge amount of value in making stuff more usable, and I think he's done that. So all credit to the guy. But I will go and look up the other stuff, particularly if you can point me out.
Yeah, I put it in the chat. There are three key things. She's looking at the climate patterns, the doctrines, and leadership data space. So obviously he does use the maps and things like that to guide some of these making sense of the climate and leadership. But I just forwarded you. Just put it in the chat box.
Thanks for that. I mean, I think one of the things with this is the way of thinking. So it is. I mean, there are two big shifts. I mean, this is partly Jan's stuff actually. So wade in when you feel like it, Jan. So one of Jan's things, as I'm sure you know, is about thought patterns, and I think there are two big things here. One is that people find really difficult. One is the dynamics, that you've got to think about this as much more slippery than and fluid than conventional strategy thinks of it, which is quite kind of clunky and mechanistic, and it's not like that. It really isn't like that. Real life is much slipperier than that, and that's why it escapes. And the other one is that sort of, I mean, in a way, it's kind of almost an infantile position. So when you're a little kid, when you're a baby, you don't kind of get that there are real people. You are the center of your universe, and things are good or bad depending on whether they happen to do what you want to do, but you don't quite understand when you're a little kid, when you're a baby up to sort of 5 years old or something, that other people have their own agenda. It's kind of only when you go to school and people just don't do what you want them to do, that you kind of grow into the realization that other people have their own agenda. Organizations and conventional strategy is still in that infantile state of the world should just do what we want it to do. And I think the shift to no, it's doing its own thing, actually. All these organizations in our marketplace are doing their own thing. It's not just us, and they ain't going to just get out the way for us. So, understand who's doing what and what we can do about it. That's a massive shift, and it's quite a big intellectual and emotional shift, I think. And it's a different, if you apply Jan's thought patterns to it, it's in a different category to the very, very simplistic one, I think. And I think Wardley's there with the dynamics bit for sure.
Patrick, there's a very interesting question in the chat. Could a country use this strategy to conquer the coronavirus?
I have no idea, Jan. It'd be fun to try, though, wouldn't it? I mean, if you think about it in those terms, we are dealing with, part of the problem is how fast the damn thing moves, and one of the big complaints about the UK response was too slow, and moving early is, moving a little bit early is better than moving a lot late. So there are some very, very basic things about it, I think, that definitely would apply. Whether they'd apply usefully is another matter, but absolutely for sure. Because I haven't done any modeling on that, but absolutely for sure some of it would. Yes.
I have another question. If you apply this in a real strategy context, I can imagine that teams come up with quite a variety of possible strategies. What's your experience in how people make evaluative comparisons between different possible strategies? How do they come to, let's say, a conclusion to follow or to prefer one out of a series of possible strategies?
We've got some evaluation criteria.
Why so few people actually downloaded the application?
Sorry, I didn't.
3.0.
Who's talking, because it's very unclear.
Zahed is talking, but the connection is really bad. So maybe you can put the question or the remark in the chat.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's really bad, the connection. We cannot understand.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, yes.
Oh, yes.
Please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello.
Yep.
Sorry about this. It's literally just cut out now. Can everybody hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Patrick. I thought your talk was really, really interesting, particularly because I've been talking to a lot of systems thinkers, and they've been talking a lot about the theory of systems thinking, but I think this is the first time where I've really seen how you are trying to talk about these different emergent patterns and how they can be used practically. So maybe just, I work in peace processes, so I'm applying systems thinking to political processes, okay? So I am trying to identify relationships, for example, that are creating conflict or high levels of violent conflict. And then I'm trying to identify, so you may have like 10 or 15 different relationships that are causing conflict.
Yeah.
And then I will look at those different relationships and analyze them.
Could you phrase your question, Said?
In a number of different ways, and then see, some of them require a high level of effort to transform, and some of them require a low level of effort to transform. And based on that, you can then design your strategies. And I was wondering, in the work that you're doing, in all the different strategies that you have, do you have ones that require a low level of effort that you've gone, you know what, a collaborative strategy obviously will require a low level of effort to instigate? whereas a competitive one will require a much higher one, for example. So are you able to assign levels of effort to different strategies?
Massive differences, massive differences. So I don't know if you're I mean, I'm guessing you could see the screen when I put the slide deck, the slideshow up of the rolling thing. You may have noticed that some of them are really, really complicated and some of them are really, really simple. Yeah. Typically, I mean, this is a, big generalization, but the really complicated ones are really complicated and the really simple ones are really simple. So, there are huge differences in ease of execution. Yeah. We did an exercise, and this is also trying to answer partially your question, Jan, about choice. We did an exercise for an IT company, and the strategy team came to us and said, the board are considering 3 strategies and we think they should be considering more options. And we sat down we thought, yeah. So we knew the situation that they were in, and we thought, well, they need a strategy for defending their existing positions. So they need something that will do that. They need something to break them out of that position. So they need a strategy to do that. And they need something in case it all goes really horribly wrong. That's a kind of, So we got 3 categories we need strategies in. And we took the card, the deck of, because we got them printed on cards, and we went through the card deck and we went, yeah, that would help with that. That would help with that. That would help with that. That wouldn't help at all. That would help, but they can't do that because they're just not good enough as a management team. So, and an hour and a half later, we got 26 strategies that would work in 3 categories. Yeah. And so in terms of ease, it's quite easy to go, what would be involved in this for them in the situation that they're in? Could they do that? Yes or no? I mean, honestly, it doesn't take a lot to work that out. So that's the ease thing. So then we've got a stack of 26 in 3 categories, and we need at least 1 of each. And we go through it, Jan, and we rank them in terms of risk and reward and difficulty. And we lay it out for them. There's 26 strategies. Some of these are really ambitious and they may not work, but if they do work, you're going to win a hell of a lot. And some of these are really easy. Okay, so let's go through and you pick. And to some extent, it's there are objective criteria you can use, but at the end of the day, some of it is, do we fancy that?
Yeah, and I can imagine that when you have gone through that exercise, that it's also more easy to shift from one strategy to another.
It expands the thinking space. So you start to think about things that you wouldn't have thought of before, because the danger is you close down on, we're going to do this one thing, and what you want is to pull the space apart. So they, and when you do that, you get more freedom in the thought.
Yeah. There is another question. What's the biggest pushback that you experienced using patterns of strategy?
Academics. Academics.
Which you mean?
Academic strategists who want to do, academics in strategy who want to do the conventional, because they've invested their careers in doing SWOT analysis and Porter's 5 forces and all that stuff, So the last thing they want is anybody turning up and going, well, no, this, And I mean, you can understand it. I think using it practically, I mean, we've probably done it with, I don't know, more than 70 organizations. And I can count on the fingers of one hand the people who haven't got it.
Okay.
Outside of academics. So it's almost none. I mean, honestly, really, very, very, very little. You occasionally get odd people who really struggle with it, and I think there are some there are some big hurdles to get over. That understanding that it's not just what we want. You can understand it intellectually, but understanding that you're dancing and the other person's actually dancing to a different tune to you.
Okay.
And, you know, how's that going to work? That's a really difficult one for people to feel into. And you can see people going from, oh yeah, but it'll work the way I want. No, it won't work the way you want.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
that's a big shift.
Arthur Dijkstra, you also had a question. Could you phrase that question?
Yeah. Hi, Patrick. Very interesting. Yeah.
Hello, Arthur. How are you doing?
Yeah, fine. Thanks, man. After retirement, finally time to sailing again. I think dancing is an interesting concept because it develops while you're acting. Is this the same with how this develops? So the question is related, should you have thought of step 3 and 4 when you are in position 1, or how can you anticipate different scenarios?
Very, very easy to do different scenarios. So you can do it the same way as we did the options exercise. So, you know, who are the actors and what might they do? And let's prepare for that. So that's really, really, if you want to do scenario planning, it's incredibly easy with this. In terms of multiple strategies, I mean, one of the things, I mean, this goes back to Jan's question for me. So one of the criteria that we use for evaluating them, if we're not just going, ooh, what do you fancy, is does this box us into a corner? So does it create the space for more strategic options in the future? Does it create future flexibility for us? And that is hard, actually, Arthur, because you're tempted to, the trap is you start to believe your own prediction of how this might unfold through time, whereas actually it can unfold in lots and lots of different ways. So
yeah,
is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? I think it's a good idea as long as you can not fall too much in love with your own theory.
Mm-hmm. And how is the analogy that you're dancing with different partners?
When people start, they talk as though they are dancing with a partner, but they're not. They're actually inside. They're doing what they're expecting the other party to follow them. You know, even if it's a competitive thing, they're expecting the world to conform to what they want. I've just come up with a better plan. And then there's a shift to, right, we've got to be much more fluid. We've got to respond in the moment to what's happening outside. And then the third transition is we've got to understand what the orchestra is playing, because we're all responding to that. Yeah. And though that couple over there are doing something different to what we're doing, and then it becomes much easier to really do that scenario stuff and that ecosystem stuff. But I think there is a more mature mindset that you need to grow into.
That's what my father said as well.
Yeah,
I have to go into mature. Okay, yeah. And I can imagine that you have.
I mean, can I give you an example? A metaphor. So you know, we both sail, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about the, you know, you plot your course, taking into account the tides, which are the long-term trends, and the effects of the wind, which is the short-term effects of stuff hitting you. And you're doing that in the middle of a flotilla with a load of other boats. And sometimes they're all heading the same way as you, and sometimes they're really, really not. So it's kind of like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We had a question from Alidat. Alidat, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Thanks. In the Honda Yamaha example, right? that the strategic move from Honda required extreme agility because they had to change a lot of internal things. Most organizations size of Honda I've seen, even taking and agreeing on a strategy take 18 months. Forget about getting it deployed and getting into the market, all the research, everything. So is agility. Astonishing, yes, is agility, as in not in software, as in being able to redeploy your resources. Is it a prerequisite for utilizing these strategic moves?
It's a prereq. There are two prerequisites for a lot of the strategies. One's foresight and the other's agility. Not all of them. I mean, some of them are really simple. They don't need either of those, you know. But a lot of them depend on foresight and agility. And if you haven't got that, you can't do it, you know. But the point in a way is that the reason I put up the slide with the metrics on is you can work out the strategy and then calculate how much agility you need. And then you can ask, could we possibly do that? What would we, in terms of how many designers have we got? How long does it take them to do a design? How long does it take us to actually do the tooling to get the bikes out and road tested and checked off by the regulator and in the showrooms? What's the minimum time we could do? And then is that strategy workable, or do we have to come up with something else? You know,
it brings me on another question. What are the limits of using the methodology? For example, in strategy work with real enterprises.
What sort of limits were you thinking of, Jan?
Well, I was thinking about the fluidity of thinking of the participants. They need to be able to take a perspective, to assess the market. In my experience, a lot of teams are just blind for a whole range of evolutions happening in the market. They just do not see it because they are so full of themselves.
Honestly, it's almost never been a problem. So as I say, I could count on the fingers of one hand the number of people who haven't been able to do it. And we've done it with, I don't know, 70, 80 different organizations. So, quite a lot of people. And I think the reason is the methodology. It's not the concept. The concept's hard. Well, the concept's easy, but it'd be hard to apply without the methodology. It's the tooling that makes the difference, Jan.
Okay.
It's it comes down to some really simple questions. Who's stronger?
No, okay.
Who's faster?
You had an interesting question. Can you phrase it? Yehu? You put it in the chat box. What's the most important step of making a change? Was the question.
What to in thinking or in actually executing a strategy?
Well, could you be more specific, Yehu? We seem to have lost him.
I spotted another one come up.
Yes.
I didn't catch what it was, but
Alexei, could you phrase your question?
Yeah, sure. First of all, many thanks for co-authoring the Open University module, Patrick. This was extremely awesome.
When did you do it, Alexei?
Just this year.
All right. Okay.
Just completed it.
Congrats.
Absolutely fascinated.
Pass? Did you pass?
I don't know yet.
Oh.
The results comes in December.
Who's your tutor?
It's Barry Verdon.
Okay. He's okay. He's all right.
I like working with him.
Yeah.
So my question is, what you were speaking was more about the actual maneuvers, but there was already covered the discussion with regards to what organization can or cannot do, what kind of maneuvers. So you mentioned that it all starts usually with foresight and or agility, but is there some kind of a strategic capability that has to be assessed before trying that or other shift?
In an ideal world, yes, but we're very rarely in an ideal world. So in an ideal world, you would have a client who actually understood what their capabilities were and understood, they had strategic foresight, so they could see what was coming, and they would have good. That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean, most don't have the foresight in the
most do not. No, so you got to build it, and you got to build it quick.
No, okay.
Yeah.
And
but if you think back, I mean, part of the reason we do the Honda Yamaha case is because, I mean, it's really nice for lots of reasons. If you think about Honda Yamaha, they did not have that agility at the start. They had the agility to bring out 10 models a year. Yeah. They built that agility while this was going on. So they were kind of agile about being agile, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but in order to produce that agility, again, they had to seek some resources
they did it with
about.
They did it with their internal resources, so they found ways to release them. And we can, I mean, if you'd said to me this time last year, would it be possible to build a hospital in the UK in 9 days? You just go, oh, forget it. Come on, it's like 2 years, mate. No, when we need to do it, we can build a hospital in 9 days.
If it's about survival.
Yeah, simple. You've just got to believe, and you've got to care about it. I mean, but we've had clients who they take 4 years to take a strategic decision. You just go, this is insane.
Yeah.
You don't care. You don't want to survive if you're taking 4 years over it.
Yeah, I'm working in the telco market, so yeah, I know exactly what you're speaking about.
Yeah.
Like they're culturally so rigid that it's really difficult to believe they can.
And there are always problems about how much you've invested in the infrastructure, because the infrastructure doesn't shift. So you've got feet of clay, you've always tied down by those things. That's the thing that moves slowest. And that gears how fast your thinking is very often. You got to snap out of that and go, no, we need to do this, and I think that's the biggest thing. People can always do it if they can actually focus on doing it and realize that the life of the company depends on it. Survival is not compulsory.
So does that mean that basically investing in agile infrastructure is the common recipe for success?
I think it depends on sector, and sometimes you just have to go tough and heavy. Agility is not everything. So there are loads of strategies. I mean, yes, there are loads of strategies that depend on agility. There are loads of strategies that don't. There are loads of strategies that depend on being big, powerful, the player in the market who is not going to shift. That works just fine,
Well, it makes me think of another aspect. One of the dimensions that I'm a bit missing in the model is the identity dimension, in the sense that if a company moves too far away from its own identity, even when the strategy makes perfectly sense, you can expect a lot of resistance in implementing that strategy. So change and strategy is a lot dependent on changing your identity while maintaining it at the same time.
Absolutely. We had an IT client who wanted to grow. I mean, there were, I can't remember how many 100 million turnover, and they wanted to grow to be 1 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And very easy to construct a strategy that would get them to 1 billion. Not hard, but it involved them working with corporates. So instead of selling to geeks, selling to software engineers, they would have to do corporate sales. And they just said, we don't want to work with people in suits.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, you're not going to be $1 billion company then, mate. But that's okay. That's an identity statement. They know who they want to be. That's fine. It's their choice, not ours. That's.
But in my opinion, the identity dimension is very crucial in thinking through the implementation of the strategy. Yeah,
yeah, and I think that goes back to my dog slide, Jan. Mm-hmm. Who do you want to become? Mm-hmm. That is a fundamental identity question, because that's the game we're in. We're in the game of becoming. The strategy game is the game of becoming something. Understand if you're in these structural relationships, where they are going to take. If we change this, where's it going to take us? What's that going to make us? Is that who we want to be? Mm-hmm. That's the fundamental identity thing. And if it's too far from where we want to go, we're not going to do it. No. We might say we are, but we're not.
In that sense, you could argue to even include that extra dimension in the assessment.
We have in the assessment, we have, not in the modeling of the dynamics, but in the assessment we have.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, fine. Lynn, I remember you had a very good question in the introductory chat and meeting. Do you want to ask it now?
Well, I have to now.
It's not compulsory.
No, we were just curious about how it could have, but I see that already a little from your explanation, but we were curious about how this could apply in the public sector in, for communities, etc.
Done loads of public sector and third sector. Yeah. Because, I mean, unlike most strategy approaches, it works well for collaboration and those interesting situations where you are both collaborating and competing. Mm-hmm. So I know public sector says, oh yeah, we don't compete. Yeah, you do. And you do both at the same time, and it works really, really well for that how this twists from being we're lovely and we collaborate to
mm-hmm. Arthur, the last question is for you, that you just put in the chat box.
Okay, thank you, Jan. I'm honored. Patrick, as you know, with Steve, we are very active in operationalizing the viable system. Mm-hmm. And how can you find synergy between the two methods?
Oh, for me, that's really, really easy, I think. It's on both sides of it. I mean, the organization, which is what you're modeling with viable system, is what is actually going to develop and carry out the strategy. So when you design an organization using VSM, one of the things you're designing for is its ability to take strategic decisions. You're designing in its ability to do strategic foresight, to have strategic conversations. So, there's a fundamental design question that allows you to do strategy in the first place. And then you've got if this is the strategy, how do we need to reconfigure the organization to be able to deliver it? So the two fit together just perfectly for me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Patrick. We are coming to the end of this session.
Thank you very much.
It was a very inspiring session. Thank you very much for your time and sharing tonight. I hope that, we'll communicate next sessions from the SCiO Belgium initiative through social media. You can also find them on the mother site of SCiO, systemspractice.org. What I also want to share is that this session was an open session, free. Everybody could join. From February onwards, we will start asking a membership. We are doing these open sessions to get known, to start building the network in Belgium. But you will receive a mail from Jan Beyen who is also on the board here in Belgium, for how you can join the network as a member. And as a member, you will have a list of advantages. And one of those advantages is the access through to the recordings and or the materials that are shared during the sessions. But please have a look at the systemsorganization.com site, the mother site of SCiO, and you will already find not only information from past sessions, but also the programs from our colleagues in the other chapters throughout Europe. So this is a very broad initiative, a very rich initiative, and I can only invite you all to join. Again, thank you, Patrick, for your time tonight.
Just one thing, if I may, Jan. If anybody wants to get in touch about anything, there is only one Patrick Hoverstadt. So if you Google that, then you'll find me.
Yes,
it's one of the advantages of having a rare name.
And there is also a lot of stuff to be found on your Fractal consulting site. So it's also worth paying that a visit. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you
for your participation tonight, for all the questions asked. I have a very good feeling, and I hope to see you back, all of you, in one of our next sessions.
And hopefully we can do one face-to-face sometime next year with beer, Jan.
Yeah.
Hopefully, yes, certainly. Let's cross fingers that that the health situation doesn't get much worse and stays under control. So, bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good job. Thank you.
Yeah.